everyone. This is Aekta Kapoor, and welcome to eShe TV. Today, we have with us award winning writer Michele Lee. Hi, Michele.
Hi, hi.
Thank you for being here. For
Thanks
our
for having me.
viewers, Michelle is an East Asian Australian writer working across television, film, stage, books, audio, and live art. She's won numerous awards, including the Australian Writers Guild Award for the Best Original Stage Play. She has written acclaimed plays such as Security, Single Ladies Going Down, and Assistance Notes for a Pandemic, The Naked Self, and Off Center. For television, her credits include Hungry Ghosts and Secret Threads. Today, we're going to talk about Michelle's play Rice, a wickedly humorous observation on globalization, politics, and family. Directed by Matthew Zia, Rice has already won numerous accolades and awards. The production runs from 13th October to 13 November at Orange Tree Theatre, UK, with live stream performances via OT on screen on 4th and 5th November, which we here in South Asia can watch as well. The play is about Nisha, an ambitious young executive working for Australia's largest producer of rice. She's determined to become the first female Indian CEO in Australia. She's close to sealing a secret deal with the Indian government, which could see her company take over India's national rice distribution system. Working late nights in the office, she encounters Yvette, an older Chinese migrant who works as a cleaner in the office. The two form a powerful, if unlikely, bond as they navigate the complexities of their lives and the world at large. So, Michelle, that's a very interesting concept for your play. And before we go into that, I'd like
Mhm.
to know a little bit more about your background as an Asian
Mm.
Australian and your early influences while growing up.
Yeah, so my background's actually Hmong, which is Hmong, and the Hmong are a diasporic Southeast Asian people. We don't actually have a nation, so I can't really offer a country that I guess we have sovereignty over. But the Hmong are in parts of China, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, and I'm here in Australia because essentially of the Vietnam War. So I'm a child of my dad was actually a scholar and my mum was a refugee, but essentially I'm here because of war, as often groups of people are in this world. Having to move from their home countries to other countries. So I was raised in Australia, born and raised in Australia. Um, I early influences. I guess it's yeah hard to go past the fact like in the 80s and 90s, um, growing up as someone who was Asian and in the city I grew up in, where that stood out even more. It's hard to kind of understate the effect that's had on my sense of being an artist and a writer in Australia and the things that I want to write about. Like for I guess for example, when I first began writing and uh, became interested in creating plays for the stage. That was through student theatre. So when I was a student at university, but I didn't really take it that seriously, and I certainly didn't write about anything to do with race or identity or gender. I just wanted to, in a sense, have fun. But I think that equated with a sense of erasure, which can sometimes be the response when you're othered or on the margins. You kind of take up that invisibility because it offers you a sense of assimilation, fitting in, and survival. It wasn't until later in my 20s, which might just be the effect of getting older and starting to look more deeply into who you are, that I became more deeply interested in discussing questions about identity and belonging through playwriting. Um, so early influences, and by that, do you mean in terms like specifically other playwrights or
No, not
other
necessarily
storytellers?
about what
Mm.
goes into your own writing.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. So probably early on, it was all those things around kind of place and belonging in a settler nation like Australia that has a very violent history of occupying a land that belonged to other people for many thousands of years. Yeah, so the earlier plays that I began to write, I guess more professionally in the sense I started to go, oh, this is a practice. There's like obviously technique and skill, but kind of thought and kind of deep questions in what it means to be a writer. So one of the early plays they did, like a lot of people who write from a position of, as I said, being other or marginalized, the first play I wrote was about being essentially a Hmong person in Australia. And at that stage, there were two plays I was aware of that had Hmong characters. So I guess I was writing that play around 2008, 2009, and the Hmong had been in Australia for really only the 80s and the 90s, and so for 30 years. So not that many. There wasn't much representation or visibility of being Hmong. Two other playwrights who weren't Hmong had written stories with a Hmong character or around the Hmong people. But yes, certainly I would have been the first person who was actually Hmong to write about being Hmong. That ended up being a radio play. So that play focused actually on Hmong men. So I set it in the early 90s, with the kind of the first wave of the settlement of Hmong people in Australia. And it was set around a commission flat, which is kind of like government housing. Um, and there were four different male characters, some older, some younger, but at the heart of it, there was a kind of lost young Hmong man who was a teenager who was, I guess, deeply depressed. Um, and there was some of an older generation and a young Hmong American character who'd been kind of sent over from America. And that was kind of like four interlinking monologues. So it was a stage play, and then it was adapted through like various programs and residencies for the radio, and it was broadcast on like a national radio program here in Australia, and went on to win an award through the Writers Guild for Best Original Radio Drama. And then since then, yeah, I've done a bunch of things, and sometimes it's been just because the opportunity presents itself, and like there's a particular opportunity that's asking for certain ideas or certain forms, and I come to it and I don't know what I want to do yet, but go, oh, okay, maybe I could take this kind of inspiration and package it up into this kind of idea, which is why I've written across forms, like as you said, Aekta, I've written stage, audio, live art, and into screen as well. So the next work after that was actually another audio work, um, set in a nail salon. So here in Australia, probably in the last 20 years or so, what's emerged is a lot of budget nail salons run by Vietnamese people. Um, and it was maybe 2010 or so, I was getting my nails done, which was a really weird experience being a child of migrants, like having a woman who may have been a migrant or may have been an international student, I'm not sure, but I kind of recognized in that moment it was kind of weird that I was getting my nails done by another Asian woman who felt kind of proximate to me, and yet here she was providing this labor for me. So that work asked audience members to go into a nail salon, get their nails done, and then listen to an audio work that was kind of about the world of nail salons and the people and the stories you might find in it. It was largely it was largely a gentle work. It wasn't documentary. It was fictional, but kind of asking you to be in that world and listen to stories generated from Vietnamese-run budget nail salons. And then from there, I guess the form and range of stories I've told have continued to expand. But probably right now, I'm kind of returning to writing more autobiographically about Hmong people and my family and being Hmong.
So that's interesting, actually, that initially when writers start out, they probably don't have this in their mind that they're trying to make an impact about, or, bring up race issues or immigrant issues. But then as they go along, they realize that there's so much to talk about and that their experiences, are valuable and worth talking about and worth bringing up. And that's actually been your journey as well. When you started out as you didn't have this in your mind when you started out. You just wanted to have fun, but as you went along, it became like more
Yeah.
serious issues. So
Yeah,
that
you're right.
actually, yeah, it brings me to Rice, actually, because you wrote
Mm,
this at a later point in your career, when you sort
mm,
of matured as a writer,
mm,
and you were confident about bringing up issues of race and immigration and things and women's issues. So let's talk about rice. Like, what was the inspiration behind this?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And I think in a country like Australia, when you aren't part of like the dominant majority, I think anytime you put an artwork up, it kind of essentially becomes, a protest and an act of activism. Um, so with Rice, yeah, I guess what was consistent with that first radio play I talked about, where part of the impetus was saying, well, why aren't I seeing this kind of story? Who's telling this story? What stories are we hearing? And I guess there were similar impetuses with Rice. So to be specific, I attended a program that was like an incubation with other young writers, where we were asked to bring ideas, and during the week, some of us tossed out the ideas and came up with new ideas, and that kind of happened with me. So in that program, by the end of the week, I had the image in my mind of two female bodies, two women on stage, and ideas about consumption and production and being kind of not necessarily binaries, but what's something that can be consumed and produced and commodified and is symbolically rich in other ways. And so rice emerged as something, and because that it's obviously a staple to many Asian countries, I think that kind of opened up the possibility too of the two women not necessarily both being say Hmong or Vietnamese or Indian or Chinese. So I was also interested in uh, having women from different but kind of proximate but different types of experiences on stage. And that was partly too because, even in my own work, I had created stories and it was about Hmong experience. And so you had all the characters were Hmong, or like that nail salon work, Talon Salon. Some of those stories were just by necessity, like all the characters were Vietnamese. So I think too, I was going, oh, I'd like to have a story where there are essentially no white people, but then the two um, actors who aren't white, they don't have to be like from the same backgrounds. They don't have to be connected because they're family members. This isn't a conventional family story. It's a workplace story. It's a story of female friendship. Um, and these two women who are women of color, who are Asian women, but they have differences in experience, but also similarities. So it's partly that I was trying to wrestle with as well, and also thinking about like what might be a really excellent challenge for an actor to play within the identity that people see on them. So yes, the actor who plays Nisha needs to be from an Indian background and identify that way. But in the play, there are characters who are white men, older men. There's a young Chinese Australian character who manages a warehouse. There's a Russian cleaner. So I also wanted to have an opportunity for actors, Asian actors. Friends of mine who are Asian actors here in Australia, this can often be like just the tired joke is like they're sick of auditioning to be prostitutes or maids or like the high achieving Asian doctor. So I also was conscious about my actor friends and thinking, well, what's the variety of roles that you could play, and why not give them all to two actors to play across gender, class, and age?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And like I was just describing, it's there's this part in that where Yvette calls Nisha an Indian princess, and I found that interesting because there aren't Indian princesses anymore, and in fact, the people who do migrate to other countries, they do it for a better life, not because
Yeah.
they're princesses. And so, was there some kind of a stereotype about Indians that in Australia that you were trying to highlight through your writing?
Not so much, I think, with that comment. As part of the research for Rice, so as I said, like it began with some certain ideas and challenges in my own head, and then I did a lot of reading. As I mentioned to you before, I went to
You went to
India.
India,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
talked to young Indian Australian women of a similar aged to Disha, to older Chinese women. My mother, who's not Chinese, Hmong, was a cleaner as well. So I did a lot of kind of thinking and talking. But the princess detail is not meant to be historically accurate or inaccurate. It's more the
Mm.
notion, I think it's probably more generational. It's kind of Yvette, as you said, like the
Yeah.
older Chinese migrant worker, just looking at this young woman and kind of
Mm.
regardless of her having brown skin, of her being a certain race, just being like, you're so entitled. I find you to be spoiled. You're really mean. And that is to me the essence of a princess, which
Yeah.
which in some ways is like it's a bit misogynistic. Like, why can't this young woman be assertive? At times it comes across as rude. So it's kind of more like wrestling with that sense of like the generational clash and the sense of entitlement. Like Yvette looking at Nisha and going, "You have so much, and you're so haughty," rather than Yvette knowing anything about Indian royalty or Indian dynasties. More just like you are the essence of an entitled young woman.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the other way around as well, right? So she calls her a Chinese cleaner. So there's another stereotype happening there, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think similarly too. I don't. I think you're right. Like something about the two words together can kind of like seem to capture a sense of like putting a person into a box. And I think in the play, it's not intended to be Nisha necessarily saying only Chinese people can be cleaners because um, I mean it's not even that accurate because I think from my times working in offices, like as a white collar worker, like I saw the whole spectrum in terms of like the types of faces that came in who had to do that kind of work for whatever reason. I think in that the moments when Nisha's like that, when she's trying to use her power, I think probably, and I'm curious as to what they'll do with the production in London. It's more kind of like putting her in the box, leaving aside the ethnicity, just more like, do not speak to me. Like I'm just drawing a division here. Um, I'm I'm kind of trying to carry a sense of power over you. And I, I think so. It had a production in Australia. And I think in some ways, from memory, when those scenes occur, it's a kind of tricky balance. Like, how seriously do you take this young woman kind of speaking to an elder in a way, like saying to someone older and being really deeply disrespectful? Like, I don't know if that kind of disempowers her, even though she's intending to try and disempower um, Yvette. But you're right, like in the language itself, there's a lot of detail there. And if there'll be moments I wonder that what will kind of, they'll, for different audience members, I think different words will have a different kind of discomfort or meaning from them for them,
Yeah.
depending on like what their background is.
And that is what art is, isn't it? I mean, it evokes it brings the viewer's own perceptions and perspectives, to the fore when they're watching some work of art. So
Mm,
before we go into that, I just
yeah.
wanted to ask you: did Adani's entry in Australia in 2014 have anything to do with your idea for the play? Because you did write it a few years after that, and I know that he's not
Yeah.
very popular in Australia, right?
Yeah, you're right in terms of the timing. Um, yeah, so there's I had to the short answer is no, because I had to Google. I was like, "What is Adani?" And I was, "Oh, yes, it's the coal mine up in Queensland." Yeah, so here in Australia, there has been parts of um, uh, the Australian society who've mobilised to stop the building of that mine, and for various reasons, like the climate crisis, the degradation to the reef. Um, Taking land away from Indigenous people, so it has become like a political issue for the obvious reasons I just mentioned. But in fact, no. At the time, not that I was actively avoiding it, but yeah, honestly, it wasn't really a comment on um, India coming into Australia, and then Nisha being Australia going into India. It's a bit of a coincidence, maybe at some subconscious level, but in no in kind of overt intentional way.
But you did travel to India for your research and you did a lot of work out this side.
Yeah, I did, and I think in writing that play, yeah, as I said, like my background's Hmong, and people see me and they see in Australia an Asian woman, and to some extent, I identify with some of the experiences that Yvette has and her daughter has and Nisha has, but I'm not Chinese, I'm not Indian. So to kind of fill in the gaps and challenge some of my own assumptions, um, research was necessary. So I did come to, I went to India in 2014, and
Hmm.
I only had a couple of weeks, so I was trying to go to the States. I had research that um, produce, have the environment where you can produce rice. So
Right.
In Australia, because it's much more arid and more dry, there are fewer places where you can grow rice because it requires so much water. But of course, that's a different case with India. So I couldn't go to all the states where there's rice production. Um, but I did go to West Bengal. I went to I flew into Kolkata. I came to New Delhi, and I went south to Kerala. Um, and partly that was just to be in the country. I'd never been there before, to try and meet up with kind of advocacy organisations, like farming advocacy organisations. I only met with one, which now I can't remember the name of the organisation, but it's based down in Kerala. And as I was saying to you before, actor, I tried to meet up with
Vandana Shiva.
Vandana.
Yeah.
Yes, who wrote a
Yeah.
book about the Green Revolution. So I read a lot into that history, but because she's so prolific, I never I
Yeah.
never heard back from her about having a meeting, which of course was fine. But I guess as a principle, um, if I'm kind of writing more beyond my own experience, yeah, trying to give dignity, this balance of giving dignity and complexity to other people who aren't me. I guess the attempt to do that, you just necessarily need to go beyond yourself, research, ask questions, um, and then yeah, got to come to India,
Yeah.
which was great too.
Yeah. So actually, so yeah, coming back to the topic of the art, there is in your art there is a certain self-reflection, and like you said, your own preoccupations or your own
Mm,
experiences, they do come out. And in fact, you wrote a memoir called Banana Girl, which was
mm,
about your relationships when you were younger. But then you wrote a
mm.
play in which Banana Girl is also, it plays a role in that. So for you, in that sense, your personal is professional,
Mm.
and I think this perhaps is, maybe it's true for all artists. I mean, can we ever separate the art from the artist?
Yeah, and I think there's been a history perhaps of particularly for artists who are white and who are men, where people can hold up the art and say, "Isn't this amazing?" They created an object of art that was separate from their experience. But then, of course, you read about the artist, you're like, "Oh, okay, a lot, that sounds a lot like their personal life." I think for women, and particularly women of color, I think it becomes more pronounced when you write into stories that also have women of color. For me, I don't I don't mind if at times literally it's about me, and other times people are like, oh, where is she in this work? I don't mind kind of people trying to locate where I am in the work, because for me it's yeah, I'm not apologizing for that, where I want to make an Asian presence more known. And if it's specifically a Hmong presence, then I'm like, yeah, of course I want you to to know that it's connected to me. But yeah, definitely, I think it's I would find it very difficult um, for the work not to come back to some of my own experience. And so, say, in TV writing, where you might be creating stories where there is no Hmong character, when there's someone not obviously like me, I still have to find an access point. And I guess my identity is, it's Hmong, it's Asian, but it's other things. It's class, it's where I live, it's having a son, it's having had my other experiences. So I think anything that I generate, I think it's probably stronger when I'm clearer about, like, what is my access point into driving this work. So whether I've generated it or someone's asked me to come on board, I think I personally need to find, like, yeah, what's my personal entry point in here. And yeah, sometimes I make that very loud and pronounced and obvious when it's closer to my own experience.
All right, great. Thank you so much for being here, Michelle. And I wish you all the best for Rise. And I hope I get to catch it as well. It goes live on 4th and 5th November on OT across the world. So thanks a lot. All the best, and I'll stay in touch with you. And we want
Yeah.
to know about your upcoming projects as well. When something interesting also related to India is of interest to us as well.
Mm.
So thanks a lot for being here, and all the best.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Yes, bye bye.